The An estate loomed over the city like an untouchable fortress, its towering walls shielding a legacy of wealth, power, and prestige. But none of that mattered now. Behind those pristine marble corridors, within a dimly lit chamber reeking of medicine and incense, lay Nguyeomhu's younger brother, motionless, his breathing shallow. The boy's skin was pallid, his once bright eyes hidden behind shut lids. Every passing hour was another step toward the inevitable. Gyeomhu had exhausted every resource, consulted the most renowned doctors, paid fortunes for the rarest medicines. Nothing worked. But there was one last cure, a remedy that could not be bought with gold or secured with influence. Beast blood, a forbidden substance harvested from creatures lurking in the deepest forests, beasts that did not fall to ordinary weapons. The only ones capable of acquiring it were those who lived on the fringes of society, the kind who thrived in darkness and violence. Gyeomhu clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palm. His family's warriors, trained since childhood in the art of combat, had been sent into the wilderness. Not a single one had returned. What came back were their weapons, shattered. Their bodies, never found. The noble world had failed him. The rules of honor, the power of aristocracy, none of it meant anything now. If he wanted to save his brother, he had to break the order he had spent his life upholding. There were rumors, murmurs of a man who did not belong anywhere, who prowled the city's underbelly like a phantom, a nameless outcast, spoken of in hushed tones by those who feared him. Some said he had no past, no name, no loyalty. Others claimed he had crawled out of hell itself, a beast in human form, feared by criminals, hated by the nobles, ignored by the world. A ghost! And that was exactly the kind of man Gyeomhu needed. He had never set foot in the slums before, but tonight he walked through its streets with purpose. The stench of damp earth and decay clung to the air. Flickering lanterns barely pierced the thick darkness, casting long, jagged shadows against crumbling walls. The noble district was a world of elegance and refinement. But this was where survival was earned with blood and fire. Every step he took was met with wary glances, whispered conversations dying as he passed. The people here knew what he was, an outsider, a noble, a man who did not belong. And yet, no one dared to stop him. He reached a secluded alley, the one place where desperate men bartered for things that should not exist. Traders with sunken eyes and calloused hands displayed their wares under dim torchlight. Poisons that could kill a man in seconds, weapons stolen from battlefields, relics looted from forgotten temples. But none of them had what he wanted. "Where is he?" Yomhu's voice cut through the murmuring crowd like a blade. A hooded figure glanced up from his stall, his face obscured by darkness. "Who?" "The nameless one." Silence. A tension heavier than the night itself settled over the alley. The traders exchanged uneasy glances, their hands inching toward concealed blades. The name, or lack of one, was not meant to be spoken here. One of them finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "If you're smart, nobleman, you'll stop looking." Gyeomhu did not move. "I have no interest in being smart." A bitter laugh. "Then you're as good as dead." The merchant turned away, as if the conversation was over. But Gyeomhu was not one to be dismissed. He pulled out a small pouch and tossed it onto the table. Gold coins spilled out, glinting under the dim light. "I don't need warnings," he said coldly. "I need a location." The trader hesitated, his fingers hovering over the coins. Greed warred with fear. Finally, he leaned in, voice low and hurried. "There's an abandoned temple at the city's edge. He comes and goes, like a ghost. If he doesn't want to be found, you won't find him. If he does, you might not live to regret it." Gyeomhu ignored the veiled threat. He had heard enough. He turned on his heel, the weight of his sword against his hip, a silent promise that he would not be deterred. He did not care if this man was a monster. He did not care what price he would have to pay. His brother was dying, and if it took walking into the lion's den to save him, then so be it. The abandoned temple stood at the very edge of the city, where civilization faded into wild, untamed land. Once a place of worship, it had long since been left to rot, its stone pillars cracked, its wooden doors barely holding together. The wind howled through the ruins, carrying whispers of forgotten prayers, the scent of damp earth, and something else, something far more dangerous. And Gyumhu approached with measured steps, the weight of his sword a familiar comfort at his side. He was not a fool. A man who evoked such fear, even among criminals, would not be easy to approach. A flickering lantern hung from a rusted hook near the entrance, its flame barely clinging to life. Someone had been here recently. Stepping over the threshold, Gyumhu was met with silence. The air inside was thick with dust, but beneath it lingered the unmistakable scent of steel and dried blood. A single candle burned at the center of the vast hall, its dim glow casting long shadows against the stone walls. And then he saw him. At first, Gyumhu thought the figure was part of the darkness itself, motionless, silent, almost unreal. But then the man moved. He sat at the base of a broken pillar, his posture lazy, as if completely unbothered by the nobleman's presence. His clothes were tattered, stained with dirt and old blood. His long dark hair hung in messy strands over his face, but even through the unkempt locks, his eyes were visible, sharp, piercing, like those of a predator who had long since abandoned the world of men. Yumhu's instincts screamed at him to be careful. "You're not from here." The man's voice was low, rough, carrying the weight of someone who rarely spoke but was always heard when he did. He didn't ask questions. He made statements, as if he had already unraveled everything about the nobleman standing before him. Gyumhu did not waste time on pleasantries. "I need your help." A slow, lazy blink. Then a smirk, faint but undeniable. "I don't help people." Gyumhu did not react to the dismissal. He had expected resistance. "I need beast blood," he continued, his voice even. "The kind that no ordinary hunter can obtain." A chuckle, dark, quiet, but laced with something unreadable. "And you think I can?" Gyumhu met his gaze without hesitation. "I know you can." The silence between them stretched, heavy with unspoken tension. Then, without warning, the man moved. In a single fluid motion, he pushed himself off the pillar and closed the distance between them. Gyumhu did not flinch. Up close, the man's presence was overwhelming, like standing too close to a beast that had yet to decide whether to kill or play with its prey. His features were sharp, almost too striking to be human, but it was his eyes that held the most danger. They held nothing, no allegiance, no hesitation, no morality. "You nobles!" the man mused, his voice barely above a whisper. "Always so desperate when your world starts to crumble." His hand lifted, fingers grazing the edge of Gyumhu's sleeve, his touch deliberate. "You reek of desperation!" Gyumhu did not move away. "Then name your price." The outcast tilted his head, considering. And then, with another smirk, he stepped back. "A name," he said, amusement flickering in his gaze. "Give me one." Gyumhu frowned. "A name? I don't have one." The man gestured vaguely. "People call me many things, but none of them matter. Give me a name, nobleman, and I'll consider your request." "A test." Gyumhu knew this was not about the name itself. This was about control. Who would hold the power in this exchange? He could have refused. He could have walked away and searched for another hunter. But no one else would do. Gyumhu exhaled, slow and steady. "Bomb." The outcast raised a brow. "And why that?" "It means tiger." A pause. Then another chuckle, deep and amused. "Bon." For the first time, the man's expression shifted into something almost like satisfaction. "All right, nobleman," he said. "You have my attention." And just like that, the deal was struck. Gyumhu had found his hunter. He just didn't realize that he had also just invited a tiger into his home. The ride back to the Honestate was silent. Gyumhu sat with his back straight, his gaze fixed forward, his thoughts unreadable. Across from him, Baum lounged lazily in the carriage, his posture utterly unbothered, as if he had already claimed victory in whatever game they were playing. His new name suited him too well. A tiger, a creature untamed, dangerous, and completely indifferent to the world around it. Gyumhu was not a man who allowed uncertainty into his life. Every decision was calculated, every risk measured. Yet, as he watched the man he had just invited into his home, he felt something unfamiliar creep beneath his skin. Baum did not behave like a hired sword. He did not act like a man indebted to his employer. He was watching Gyomhu as much as Gyomhu was watching him, as if waiting to see who would break first. Are you always this quiet, nobleman? Bom finally drawled, stretching his legs out like a cat settling into its territory. Gyomhu did not answer immediately. I was not aware I was required to entertain you. Bom chuckled, low and lazy. You just paid a dangerous man to live under your roof. I'd think you'd want to know more about him. Gyomhu's gaze flicked to him, sharp. I know enough. Do you? There was something in Bom's voice, an edge, amusement laced with something sharper. You don't ask where I come from, Bom mused. You don't ask what I've done. You don't ask why no one dares to look me in the eye for too long. Gyomhu's fingers curled slightly. Should I? Another smirk. Most people do. I don't care about your past, Gyomhu said simply. Only that you succeed in your task. Bom hummed, tilting his head. Then tell me, nobleman, what happens when my task is complete? Gyomhu exhaled through his nose. You will be compensated. You will be free to leave. Bom's smirk widened slightly. How generous! The words dripped with mockery, but Gyomhu did not rise to the bait. The carriage slowed as they neared the estate. A shift passed through Bom's posture. Not unease, but awareness. He had spent years surviving on instinct, reading the air, knowing when he was being watched. And as the carriage door opened, revealing the grand halls of the An family, it was clear to both of them. Everyone was watching. Guards lined the entrance, their expressions carefully neutral, but their hands resting on their swords. Servants peeked from behind pillars, whispering hurriedly to one another. They had all heard of the man with no name, and now he stood at the doorstep of their noble world, a predator among sheep. Bom stepped out first, taking in his surroundings with the quiet patience of a hunter assessing his new territory. He didn't look impressed. Gyomhu followed, his presence alone silencing the murmurs around them. This is your new home, he said, his voice firm, final. Bom glanced at him, amusement flickering in his golden gaze. Is it? For a brief moment, Gyomhu had the unsettling feeling that he had just unleashed something uncontrollable into his world. And worse, he had done it willingly. The estate was a world of elegance and discipline. Every corridor was polished to perfection, every servant trained to move with grace, every detail carefully curated to reflect power and prestige. It was a place of control, a world built on order. And Bom did not belong in it. He moved through the halls like a caged predator, too wild for the quiet refinement that surrounded him. The servants flinched when he passed, their eyes darting away as if afraid to make contact. The guards kept their hands near their weapons, unsure whether they should be protecting the estate from him or protecting themselves. Bom, for his part, found it all terribly amusing. Gyomhu had expected resistance. He had anticipated that integrating Bom into the household would be a challenge. What he had not expected was just how quickly the man would begin unraveling the careful structure he had spent his life upholding. It started small. Bom did not adhere to the estate's customs. He wandered where he pleased, ignoring the silent rules that dictated where guests should and should not go. He refused the clothing provided to him, preferring the dark, tattered garments he had arrived in. He addressed the household staff with casual indifference, as if he were the master of the house, rather than a mere outsider. And then there was the matter of etiquette. Gyomhu, ever the strategist, understood the power of image. If Bom was to exist within the noble world, even for a short time, he could not be seen as some untamed beast. He needed refinement, polish, discipline. He needed to be molded. The first lesson took place in Gyomhu's private study. A lavish dining table had been set, adorned with the finest silverware, the richest silk napkins. Bom sat across from Gyomhu, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. A servant approached, placing a meal before him, an intricate dish, crafted by the estate's finest chef. Bom picked up the knife and twirled it between his fingers. This is a waste of time. Gyomhu didn't look up from his own plate. That is not your decision to make. A quiet scoff. You think dressing me up and teaching me how to hold a fork properly will change what I am? Gyomhu finally met his gaze. I think that if you wish to exist in my world, you will follow its rules. Bom smirked, leaning forward slightly. And if I don't? Gyomu's grip on his wineglass tightened. Then you will be reminded of why you are here. Silence stretched between them. Bom's gaze flickered, something unreadable passing through his golden eyes. And then, to Gyomhu's surprise, he picked up the fork properly and took a slow, deliberate bite of the meal. Not out of obedience, but because he was enjoying this game. The days that followed became a battle of wills. Gyomhu dressed him in fine silks, only for Bom to discard them the moment he was out of sight. Gyomhu instructed him in the art of courtly speech, only for Bom to purposely mispronounce words with an infuriating smirk. He tested Bom's ability to navigate noble gatherings, only for the man to cause subtle, deliberate chaos, turning a carefully arranged conversation into a battlefield of veiled insults. He was not unteachable, that was the problem. Bom learned quickly, too quickly, but he refused to be tamed. Gyomhu had dealt with many men in his life. He knew how to bend people to his will, how to turn arrogance into loyalty, fear into obedience. But Bom was different. He did not fear punishment. He did not care for rewards. He played by his own rules. And yet, despite the defiance, despite the constant push and pull between them, Gyomhu could not bring himself to regret his decision. Because for the first time in his life, he was facing an opponent who was completely unpredictable. And for the first time in his life, he was beginning to enjoy it. The days bled into nights, and yet the game between them did not end. Gyomhu told himself that this was a temporary arrangement, a means to an end. Bom was here to complete a task, nothing more. But the longer the man roamed the halls of the On estate, the harder it became to ignore his presence. Bom was unlike anyone Gyomhu had ever met. He was unpredictable, untamed, and utterly unapologetic in the way he carried himself. No matter how much Gyomhu tried to mold him into something refined, he remained wild beneath the surface, like a beast in fine silk. And perhaps that was what unsettled him the most. Because no matter how much Gyomhu tried to remain unaffected, he couldn't stop noticing him. The way Bom moved, effortless and fluid, as if nothing in this world could touch him. The way his golden eyes glinted with amusement whenever Gyomhu lost his patience. The way he smirked, just slightly, when he caught Gyomhu watching him for too long. It was infuriating, and yet it was becoming impossible to ignore. It wasn't just Gyomhu who noticed. The estate's servants, once wary of Bom, now whispered among themselves about the strange tension between their master and the outcast. He lingers in the halls even when he has no reason to. I caught him watching Lord Gyomhu train in the courtyard. And Lord Gyomhu? He never used to drink wine outside, but now he does. Where Bom sits. The rumors spread like wildfire, yet neither of them addressed it, because Gyomhu still refused to acknowledge the truth. One evening, after another frustrating lesson in etiquette, Gyomhu found himself in the courtyard, watching as Bom moved through the shadows. The moonlight caught on his figure as he stretched lazily, the outline of his muscles visible beneath the loose robe he had draped over himself. His long, dark hair fell messily over his shoulders, strands catching in the breeze. He looked. Gyomhu cut off the thought before it could form, but Bom had already noticed. With a slow, deliberate smirk, he turned to face him. Something on your mind, nobleman? Gyomhu's expression did not falter. You're getting too comfortable. Bom stepped closer, his presence as suffocating as ever. Am I? Gyomhu refused to step back. You forget your place. Bom's smirk widened. And where is my place? A muscle in Gyomhu's jaw twitched. Below me. For a moment, Bom didn't respond. Then, in a movement too fast to track, he closed the distance between them entirely. Gyomhu's breath hitched, just slightly, as Bom leaned in, his voice a whisper against his ear. Funny, he murmured. You don't look like a man who believes that. A sharp exhale left Gyomhu's lips before he could stop it. He was playing a dangerous game, and he was beginning to realize that he might not be the one in control anymore. Gyomhu had always prided himself on his discipline. Control was the foundation of his life, the core of his identity. Emotions were a weakness, desire a distraction. He had spent years perfecting the art of restraint, ensuring that nothing could shake him. But Bom was different. He was unpredictable, wild, untamed, in a way that defied every rule Gyomhu had built his world upon. And worse, he knew it. The change had been gradual at first, a lingering gaze that lasted too long, A stray thought that should not have been there. A frustration that burned deeper than annoyance, deeper than anger. Then it became something more. Gyomhu found himself looking for excuses to be near Bomb. A late-night sparring session that he had no reason to call for. A conversation that stretched longer than necessary. A glance stolen across a room, quickly averted, but not quickly enough. And Bomb noticed. Of course he did. Bomb was a predator. He knew exactly when he had his prey cornered. It started with little things. A hand lingering a moment too long on Gyomhu's wrist when passing by. A teasing smirk when their gazes met. A deliberate closeness that was never quite enough to be improper, but enough to leave Gyomhu's pulse unsteady. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting with the estate advisors, Gyomhu found himself in the training hall, striking at a wooden target with more force than necessary. He needed to clear his mind. He needed to— "You're sloppy when you're distracted." The voice sent a shiver down his spine. Gyomhu turned, gripping the hilt of his sword too tightly. Bomb stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his ever-present smirk playing on his lips. Gyomhu exhaled sharply. "If you have nothing of importance to say, leave." Bomb didn't move. If anything, he took a slow step forward, his golden eyes gleaming in the dim torchlight. "You don't want me to leave," he murmured. Gyomhu's grip tightened. "Don't assume you know what I want." Bomb tilted his head. "Oh, then why do you always find your way to me?" Gyomhu said nothing. The silence stretched between them, thick, suffocating. Then, before Gyomhu could react, Bomb closed the distance between them in a single step. A breath's space apart, Gyomhu felt the heat of him, the scent of something dark and wild lingering in the air. Bomb lifted a hand, slow, deliberate, and brushed a stray lock of Gyomhu's hair from his forehead. Gyomhu did not move. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, his breath uneven. "Tell me to stop," Bomb murmured. Gyomhu opened his mouth, but the words didn't come, and in that moment, he realized something. He didn't want Bomb to stop. Gyomhu was losing control. He had spent his life mastering restraint, bending every emotion to his will. But Bomb was tearing through his discipline like a storm, unrelenting and unpredictable. And worst of all, Gyomhu was letting him. The moments between them grew heavier, charged with something neither of them acknowledged aloud. It was in the way Bomb leaned in too close when he spoke, in the way his fingers brushed against Gyomhu's wrist, under the guise of passing a cup of tea. It was in the way Gyomhu's gaze lingered, how he found himself seeking Bomb out even when he had no reason to. It was dangerous, and it became unbearable the moment another man entered the picture. A visiting noble, Lord Han, had come to discuss business with the An family. He was arrogant, wealthy, and used to getting what he wanted. And it was clear, from the moment his eyes landed on Bomb, that he wanted him. "An unusual guest you have here," Han mused, his gaze flicking over Bomb with interest. "Where did you find such a fascinating creature?" Bomb was standing beside Gyomhu, dressed in a tailored dark robe that, despite his efforts, only enhanced his raw, untamed presence. Gyomhu's jaw tightened. "He is not a creature." Han only chuckled. "Apologies, I simply meant he is intriguing." The way he said it made Gyomhu's stomach turn. Bomb, however, seemed entirely unbothered. If anything, he looked amused. Han smirked, sipping from his cup of wine. "A man like that must be difficult to tame." Gyomhu forced himself to remain composed. "He is not here to entertain you. And yet, I find myself entertained." Han's gaze slid back to Bomb, a lazy smirk tugging at his lips. "I imagine a man like you has a price, no?" The moment the words left his mouth, the air in the room changed. Bomb finally lifted his gaze, golden eyes locking onto Han's with a slow, deliberate smirk. "Oh?" he drawled. "And what do you think my price is?" Gyomhu's fingers curled into fists. Han tilted his head. "Depends. Are you owned by Lord An?" The question was like a blade to Gyomhu's chest. Before he could respond, Bomb let out a low chuckle. "No one owns me." Gyomhu exhaled slowly through his nose, forcing his expression to remain blank. But inside, something dark curled within him. Han leaned back, clearly pleased. "Then perhaps we should discuss an arrangement." "No." The word was sharp, final. It was not a suggestion, not a negotiation. Han raised an eyebrow. "No?" Gyomu's gaze was cold, unwavering. He is not for sale. The room fell silent. Then, to Gyomu's irritation, Bom let out another quiet chuckle. How possessive, he murmured, just loud enough for Gyomhu to hear. Han only laughed, as if Gyomhu's words had merely amused him. A shame, he sighed, swirling his wine. Men like him don't stay in one place for long. Best be careful, Lord An. If you don't hold on to him tightly, someone else might take him away. Gyomhu did not answer, because for the first time in his life, he understood the kind of rage that had no name. That night, long after the meeting had ended, Gyomhu found Bom waiting for him in his private chambers. The firelight cast sharp shadows across his face, making his golden eyes gleam like a predator who had already caught his prey. Gyomhu did not speak. He could still hear Han's words echoing in his head. Men like him don't stay in one place for long. Bom watched him carefully. Then, as if reading his thoughts, he smirked. Are you going to tell me what's bothering you? Gyomhu's jaw tightened. You know exactly what's bothering me. Bom took a slow step forward. Do I? Gyomhu did not move as Bom reached out, fingers brushing lightly over the fabric of his sleeve. Tell me, nobleman, Bom murmured, voice low, teasing. What do you want to do right now? The words struck something deep inside him, because he knew what he wanted. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he had the strength to resist it anymore. The room was silent, but the air between them was thick, charged with something neither of them could ignore any longer. Bom stood before him, his golden eyes glinting with amusement. But beneath that, there was something else. Something unreadable, something dangerous. Gyomhu had spent weeks convincing himself that this was nothing, that his growing awareness of Bom was mere curiosity, fleeting irritation, something that would pass. But now, standing here, with Bom's fingers brushing against his sleeve, waiting for him to break, he knew. There was no escaping this. Bom tilted his head slightly. You're quiet tonight, nobleman. Gyomhu exhaled slowly, forcing himself to remain composed. And you are testing my patience. Bom chuckled, the sound deep, rich. I do that often, don't I? Gyomhu should have pushed him away. He should have ended this before it could begin. But he didn't. Instead, he reached out. The movement was instinctive, his fingers curling around Bom's wrist. Not harsh, not forceful, but enough. Enough to hold him still. Bom's smirk flickered, a breath of something new passing between them. You're not stopping me. Gyomhu's grip tightened. Do you want me to? The question lingered in the space between them, heavy, suffocating. Bom didn't answer. Instead, he moved, closing the distance between them in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. Gyomhu barely had time to react before Bom's hands were on him, one gripping his collar, the other sliding along his arm, deliberate, teasing. And still, Gyomhu did nothing to stop him. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. His breaths came uneven, his control slipping between his fingers like sand. Bom leaned in, his lips a breath away from his ear. Tell me, Gyomhu. His voice was low, almost a whisper. Is this what you wanted? Gyomhu's jaw clenched. Yes, yes it was. But saying it, admitting it, meant surrendering completely. Bom's fingers trailed along his collarbone, the heat of his touch leaving a trail of fire in its wake. Say it, Bom murmured. And Gyomhu, who had spent his entire life building walls, controlling every emotion, denying every desire, finally broke. His hands moved before he could think, pulling Bom closer, claiming what he had denied himself for far too long. And for the first time in his life, Gyomhu let himself want. The world outside moved forward, but within the confines of Gyomhu's chambers, time seemed to stand still. He had spent his entire life controlling everything, his emotions, his ambitions, his desires. Yet now, with Bom lying beside him, his body warm against his own, control felt like a distant memory. Gyomhu sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair, his mind tangled in thoughts he could no longer ignore. What had he done? What had he allowed to happen? Behind him, Bom stirred, shifting onto his side, his golden eyes flickering open with lazy satisfaction. You look troubled, nobleman. Gyomhu exhaled sharply. You speak as if you didn't plan for this. Bom smirked, stretching like a satisfied predator. I never plan. I only take what I want. The words sent a shiver down Gyomhu's spine. Because the truth was, he had been taken. Bomb had unraveled him, stripped him of everything he thought he knew about himself. And now, Gyomhu didn't know where he stood. Don't overthink it, Bomb murmured, propping himself up on one elbow. You wanted this. You still do. Gyomhu turned to him, his expression unreadable. And what do you want? For a moment, Bomb said nothing. Then, slowly, he sat up, his fingers tracing the edge of the silk sheets, his expression unreadable. You keep acting like this is a transaction, Bomb said quietly. Like I'm something you can buy or keep. Gyomhu stiffened. Isn't that what you want? Gold, a place to stay, a debt repaid? Bomb let out a quiet, bitter chuckle. You still don't get it, do you? Gyomhu narrowed his eyes. Then explain it to me. Bomb held his gaze for a long moment before finally speaking. I don't stay anywhere for long, he said. I don't belong anywhere. That's how it's always been. The words should have meant nothing. Gyomhu should have accepted them, should have reminded himself that this arrangement was always temporary. But something in his chest twisted, because for the first time, the thought of Bomb leaving, of walking away as if none of this had ever happened, felt unbearable. Gyomhu reached out, his hand closing around Bomb's wrist. You're not leaving. Bomb raised an eyebrow. Is that an order? Gyomhu's grip tightened. It's a fact. Bomb studied him, his golden eyes sharp, searching. Then, with a quiet hum, he leaned in, close enough that their breaths mingled. You're going to regret this, nobleman, he whispered. But Gyomhu already knew, because the chains that bound him to Bomb were no longer ones he could break. And worse, he didn't want to. The Estate had never known chaos. Everything within its walls had always been carefully controlled, meticulously arranged. The servants moved in perfect silence, the guards stood at precise intervals, and the noble house itself stood as a beacon of order and discipline. But tonight, there was nothing but chaos within An Gyomhu's heart. Bomb was leaving. The words had been spoken plainly, without hesitation. I've stayed too long. That was all he had said. As if his presence in Gyomhu's life had been nothing more than a passing storm, something fleeting and inevitable, something he never intended to keep. Gyomhu should have expected it. From the beginning, Bomb had never pretended to be anything other than what he was. Untamed, unbound, a creature of the wild who refused to be caged. But Gyomhu was no longer willing to let him go. Not now, not ever. The corridors were empty as he walked with purpose, his pace measured, but his blood burning with urgency. He found Bomb where he had always known he would, standing in the courtyard, his back turned, the night wind pulling at his hair like invisible hands urging him forward. He didn't turn when Gyomhu approached. You should be resting, Bomb murmured. Gyomhu exhaled sharply. You should not be leaving. At that, Bomb finally turned, his golden eyes glinting under the pale moonlight. I told you from the start, nobleman, he said, voice quiet but firm. I don't belong anywhere. The words struck something deep within Gyomhu, something raw and unspoken. He had spent his life believing in absolutes. That power was everything. That control was essential. That emotions were meant to be conquered. But Bomb had undone all of that. Bomb had made him feel. Gyomhu stepped forward. Stay. Bomb chuckled, shaking his head. You don't command me. Gyomhu didn't stop. He moved closer, his hands gripping Bomb's arms, forcing him to meet his gaze. This isn't a command. His voice was steady, but there was something desperate underneath. It's a request. Bomb's smirk faltered. For the first time, the teasing arrogance in his expression faded, replaced by something else, something uncertain. Gyomhu had never begged for anything in his life. But now, standing here with his hands clutching the only person who had ever made him question everything, he realized he would. If Bomb asked him to, he would. Because this was not just want. This was something far more dangerous. Bomb exhaled slowly, his fingers brushing over Gyomhu's wrists. You're really going to make this difficult, aren't you? Gyomhu's grip didn't loosen. Yes. Bomb let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. But there was no mockery in it this time, only something impossibly soft, something Gyomhu wasn't sure he had ever seen before. Then, with deliberate slowness, Bomb leaned in, his forehead resting lightly against Gyomhu's. You're going to regret this, he whispered. Gyomhu closed his eyes, his fingers tightening against Bom's skin. I already do. And yet, when Bom's lips finally met his, slow and deliberate, Gyomhu knew one thing for certain. Some chains were never meant to be broken, and this was one he would gladly wear forever.